This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the AIPIS show for accredited income property investment specialists and those who aspire to be. If you're a real estate, mortgage, or financial professional, this is the place for you. We'll explore innovative investment analysis, sales, marketing, and income-generating strategies for the most historically proven wealth creator, income property. Learn from the experts as they show you how to build a better business and a better life.
Thank you for joining me today. So, I am looking at a chart, the chart that should be very much a concern for most people, but something you will cheer if you've been following my plan. Core inflation shoots to the highest level since 1992. Now, what is core inflation? Again, that is the consumer price index, the most widely used and completely manipulated measure of inflation. That basket of goods where they manipulate it with weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. So you take the CPI and then you manipulate it 2 more times. How do you do that? Well, you go and you strip out food, as if people can survive without food, and then you manipulate it 1 more time, the manipulated index, and you strip out energy. Now, their excuse for measuring core CPI versus the general CPI, both, of course, highly manipulated, is that food and energy are just too volatile. We can't have them in the index. We have to use the core rate. The core rate. C-O-R-E is the word. Core inflation or core rate. So whenever you hear them talking about core inflation or core rate, just know that they are taking the highly manipulated and inaccurate CPI, and then they are stripping out food and energy, as if any of us can survive without food and energy. Well, looking back on this chart, you see how, we're hovering both core inflation and CPI, hovering around the 2%, up and down, a little bit up and down. And then last year, with COVID-1984, we saw it drop dramatically for just a few months, couple months maybe, as the whole world came to a standstill. And then it shot right back up, but still below the levels of that 2% target. And that's the Fed's common 2% target. But now they are saying that the CPI is at 5%. Did you hear that? 5%. And that's the highest since 2008, okay? And core inflation, or core CPI, at 3.8%, the highest since 1992. 1992. So hopefully you are sitting back with your real estate portfolio that you purchased at jasonhartman.com in the properties section and through our investment counseling team. And then you used good long-term 30-year fixed-rate debt, and you are just saying, thank you, Jason Hartman, for teaching me about inflation-induced debt destruction. Yeah, baby! Actually, could I say it better like Austin Powers? Yeah, baby! No, that was a bad imitation anyway. I can't do that. I gotta say something about Austin Powers for a minute, at the risk of being on a tangent alert. That first movie was kind of funny, but then I remember seeing the second... Was it the second one, or are there 3 of them now? I don't know. Sequels are usually overrated. And so I saw one, and I remember thinking to myself, it was in the movie theater at Big Newport, in Newport Beach, the Big Newport Theater, and I remember seeing a whole bunch of kids in the movie theater as Austin Powers is talking about shagging and all sorts of things, talking about Viagra and all this. I mean, this is not a kid's movie, folks. And yet there were all kinds of parents that had their kids there, thinking it's some funny, like, Disney flick. I was just, I tell you. I can imagine all those kids the next day on the playground repeating. You know how kids like to, I mean, I used to do this all the time. I probably still do it. Still do it. Kids glom on to a new word or a new phrase, and then they're just constantly repeating them, and then you don't hear anything else from them for a month as they got their new word until they replace it with another word. Yeah. Societal decay. We are witnessing the decline of society. Pat Buchanan, who was on the show before, long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, maybe episode, I don't know, like 80. Now we're at 1702 today. Well, a long time ago, he was on the show. And I remember he wrote this book. It was a really good book. If it's still in print, get it. You got to get it. Because the reason, I mean, look, I always say, read old books, listen to old music, watch old TV shows, watch old movies. There's this good YouTube channel you should watch. It's called Recollection Road. I think Recollection Road or something like that. It's got all these... Oh boy, we're going on like multiple tangents here, Jason. Okay, indulge me for another moment. So you watch that YouTube channel, and it's got all these great old films that they've colorized. And they're not films like production films. They're just street scenes of someone, you know, with a film camera in the street in the 1920s, or in an American city, or in Berlin, Germany in the 20s, or whatever, right? And you just think, and you can hear the people talking, and there's one of, you know, they're in a cafe in Berlin, I think that might have been Berlin, or I don't know, might have been somewhere else. And they're just talking, and you see the people and their mannerisms and how they're dressed, and you think, what were these people thinking about back then? Well, they weren't thinking about Snapchat and Instagram. That's for sure. I mean, what were their thoughts? What were their worries? What were their concerns? It's so fascinating. I tell you, of anyone in my family, I used to love just talking to my late grandmother years ago about looking at old photos and talking about my ancestors and thinking, what did these people think about? What were their worries? What were their hopes? What were their dreams? You know, that's, I don't know. That's fascinating to me. But the reason to get these old books like Pat Buchanan's Death of the West is you see that so much of it has come true. It's absolutely prescient, or Atlas Shrugged, or 1984, or any of these things. So many of these books have been just accurate. It's amazing. Really amazing. So it has showed our dystopian world for what it is. They predicted it many decades ago. And then, back to the Austin Powers comment, and then we're moving on here, folks. I promise we're moving on to some important economic stuff and real estate and stuff like that. But the decline of society, remember, the peak of society was 1990. Yep, that was the peak of society right there. After that, we started this massive cultural decay. Not that they didn't think that in the late 60s, you know, the older people then thought the kids of the late 60s that went to Woodstock and were, you know, dropping LSD all the time and free sex, free love generation, right, flower children, etc., etc. You know, they thought they were the decline of society too, right? I get it, that there's always a perspective, right? And everybody always thinks that. But mark my words, 1990 really was the peak of civilization. Not the peak of technology, but the peak of civilization. Just check me on that one. Okay, so the Socialist Republic of California is now considering extending the eviction bans past June. Folks, this is why when you are investing in income property, the most historically proven asset class in the entire world, or you are investing in anything, you've got to remember that there are political risks involved that make it very hard to really calculate and understand your return on investment. You do not hear the stories of the landlords, the investors, who, even before these protections, who are in a landlord-unfriendly climate, and they are basically just raked over the coals. Their dollars are just being extracted from them because they can't enforce the contract, and especially now. And this article that Resh posted, there's people wearing black like pallbearers, and they've got a mock coffin, and it says, "Eviction equals death." That's their signs. Yeah, well, what about the poor landlord in California? What about them? What about the responsibilities they have, the promises they've made, the commitments they've made to other people? Unbelievable. Okay, speaking of commitments and promises, Business Insider is reporting that 60% of millennials, that's more than half of all the millennials, okay, so you've got this millennial generation of 80 million people. So more than 40 million of them, more than half, who are earning over $100,000, say they are living paycheck to paycheck. Yep. And one of the comments on this post I got is, 100,000 doesn't go far today. Gen Z starting salaries out of college, corporations in states like California and New York are close to $100,000. Yeah, I believe that for, really well-paying professions and really high-end students that excelled academically. I believe it. But I think the real problem is the cost of avocado toast. That's the problem. That's what's making it tough for these 60% of millennials earning over $100,000 saying they are still living paycheck to paycheck. Yeah, right. I tell you, it's funny. It's really amazing. But, look, not all untrue. If you factor in their massive rip-off, scammy student loans, it's just all over the place. Okay, what else should we talk about? Let's go back to some of my content that I've been saving up for you. Oh, how about this one? This is interesting. You know how people get really confused about tax rates? Yeah, they get confused about them. And they use them to argue political points, and they're all confused about that too. Well, when you look at tax rates, if you look at the marginal tax rate and how it has changed over the years, you see that right now, one might argue, one who is on the left side of the aisle, the Democrat side of the aisle, might argue that, hey, look, if Biden raises taxes, they're still lower than they were after World War II, when the top marginal tax rate, according to this chart I'm looking at, wow, was at 94% at the end of World War II. And then in 1981, 69.13% when Reagan became president. And obviously Reagan lowered that quite dramatically, and that caused the economy to just flourish. And then our friends on the left side of the aisle will argue that, well, Jason, the economy really boomed under Slick Willie Bill Clinton, too, and his crooked wife Hillary. Well, sure, you're right, but they had a very, very unique set of circumstances. Number one, I'll give Clinton a lot of credit for not getting in the way of the economy. That's the first thing. But these two things are huge, what I'm about to say, that really caused the Clinton administration, for the 8 years he was running things, to be, when he wasn't not having sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. When he wasn't not doing it, right? Huge, huge change in the entire world. Number one, that's when globalization really took off. That's when downsizing really took off and re-engineering the corporation, as they say. And major things. The first being, and I know you're going to underestimate what I'm about to say, but it is really big. Mark my words, this is true, it is big, it's huge. The good old, humble fax machine. Those became widely available under the Clinton administration. And then you know what followed that one? Well, it was the internet. The information superhighway. Huge, huge, huge advantages for the economy. So Clinton really benefited from that. Huge advantages. Okay, What about inventory? Well, last week I shared with you, and then I shared the actual chart, the visual version of it, with our Empowered Investor Inner Circle members on our monthly Zoom call last week as we talked about tax liens, tax sales, tax deed investing. And that was a great call that my friend Julia put on for us, a lesson in that. That kind of education is the stuff that people listening to a late-night infomercial or some webinar, they'll pay $2,000 easily to get that kind of information, which Julia shared last week as part of our Empowered Investor Inner Circle. We've got, 12 Zoom meetings a year like that are just incredibly valuable. Well, I shared the chart that I talked to you about last week, but you could not see it because, well, hey, this is audio only, about housing inventory and how it's basically 1/3 of what it needs to be. Well, look at this. U.S. housing market is short by 5.5 million homes, according to the National Association of Realtors. And it's interesting, the subtitle of this article from Housing Wire. It says, Lobbying Organization. Lobbying organization. That's what they're calling NAR. It's a little more than that, but certainly they have a huge lobby, no question about it. Why don't they call Google or Alphabet a lobbying organization? Because that's what those scumbags are. Or Apple or Amazon. I mean, now Amazon's lobbying for $15 an hour minimum wage to be a federal law so they can put all the little mom and pops out of business because, hey, they can afford to pay the $15 an hour minimum wage. And Bezos wants to make sure everybody else goes out of business running a mom and pop store, right? So he can gobble up more market share. So the lobbying organization, Amazon.com, the lobbying organization, Apple, all of these companies, scum, absolute scum. Of course, if you're working there, I get it. We have a lot of clients that work at all these companies, right? But you are not the one making these decisions, and you are not the one oppressing people and, the new robber barons, right? But these companies are. We really got to get them in check. They're just too big. They're too big to fail. They're just violating antitrust laws. It's absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, when you look at the inventory shortage, it is pronounced and severe, but there might be some good news, folks. Lumber prices, as you've probably heard, have come down. Now, the media likes to portray lumber prices as some kind of big crash, which is ridiculous, of course. Why is it ridiculous? Well, because they're still much higher than they were in the pre-COVID era. So, lumber is not cheap by any means. But yes, it dropped from its massive peak, and it's lower now. And frankly, I would love to see it settle in and not have any more spikes because this market needs some relief. It needs more inventory. It needs to settle down a little bit. It's just very hard to operate in a market like this because everybody wants to buy everything in sight. Okay? In looking at underbuilt major U.S. metros, the New York, Newark, New Jersey metro had an underbuilding gap of 149,000 units in the past 9 years, the largest gap in the country, the study claimed, and this is the study cited in the article. That's followed by San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward metro. By the way, you see how those MSAs, those metropolitan statistical areas, are much bigger than, as people usually refer to it, as a city. They would usually say New York or San Francisco, right? But you see how it's much bigger than that. It's right there. So they had a deficit, a gap of 113,000 units. And here's another one for you, another metro area. Riverside, San Bernardino, Ontario, California metro. Okay, that's an MSA. Big area. That's a lot of geography there in all these. Had an underbuilding gap of 108,000 units. So this is a real problem, folks, and inventory, I just don't know how this problem will really be solved. It's going to take a long time, and it's going to take just more stability in the market, and ultimately, it's going to take a governmental climate that incentivizes developers. We do not need to incentivize home buyers. Home buyers have enough incentive. The lowest rates ever is enough of an incentive, okay? So house flipping has now hit its lowest level since 2000. Its lowest level in 21 years. Only 1 in 37 transactions right now in the first quarter of this year were from home flippers. That is a very, very low number, comparatively speaking.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.